Simple question. Are you an encourager? Now, just don't make the assumption that you are a good person and you give encouragement all the time. We need to understand that sometimes it's not what we say, it's what the other person hears to determine if you are actually encouraging them or not. If I'm being honest with myself, I wasn't the best encourager as a father. Now, I'm not saying I wasn't trying, but my approach was probably not the best. My daughter was a cross-country and track runner in high school like myself. And I always told my daughter she did a great job and that I was proud of her. And then I'd follow up with the question on, how do you think you can improve? Now, later in life, she told me it would have been better if I waited until the next day to talk about how she could improve. So that's an example of me trying to encourage, but all my daughter heard was that she could improve. Now it's interesting because I just taught her what we were taught, because after every cross-country meet, after we had showers, the coach would have the varsity come and sit in a room, and he would go over the meet, tell us what we did well, tell us what we need to work on, and tell us what was coming up in the next week. So it was just part of, okay, you did the race, let's do it while it's fresh in your mind. I found out that it was only the varsity that had to do that. The JV got to go home. So we were sitting there in our meetings, but that's one of the things that it's interesting because a couple times when I've told her what to do, the very next meet I saw her do it. So she listened, but it's like, if you could just wait till the next day, it would have been a lot more encouraging. So she didn't hear, you did a great job. She didn't hear, I was so proud of her. All she heard is, how could you improve? So when we think about how we want to handle different things and how we want to make sure, we have to make sure that the people we're trying to encourage hear what we want them to hear and not just think saying the right words makes a difference. And I don't know if it's a male-female thing. I have no idea. It's just, there are different personalities, there are different ways people hear things or how they want to address things. But don't just assume you're an encourager because you're saying the right words. It is important how the person hears and receives the encouragement to determine if it works. If you are a parent, you may want to ask your child if you were an encourager or not. You might receive some powerful insight. I know I did. So we're going to look at 1 Samuel chapter 23, verses 15 through 18. 1 Samuel chapter 23, verses 15 through 18. While David was at Horish in the desert of Ziph, he learned that Saul had come out to take his life. And Saul's son, Jonathan, went to David at Horish and helped him find strength in God. "Don't be afraid," he said. "My father Saul will not lay a hand on you. You will be king over Israel, and I will be second to you. Even my father Saul knows this." The two of them made a covenant before the Lord. Then Jonathan went home, but David remained at Horish. Now, hopefully, as I read this passage, you get an understanding of kind of what my opening was all about. We're reading the passage about David, who would later on become King David. And this is at a point where David is hiding in the desert. David learned that Saul, or King Saul, was coming out to take his life. And we probably should bring everyone up to speed on the story to make sure you understand how we got to this situation that we're in right now. Saul was king, and David was placed in his service to play the harp, to help ease Saul as he was being tormented by an evil spirit. So every time David played the harp, Saul relaxed. The spirit kind of got oozed or soothed out, and Saul had peace. So the evil spirit now started tormenting Saul after the Lord had left Saul. So there was a time where Saul was the Lord's anointed and was leading, and doing everything well. Then there's a time where the Lord left him and he started being tormented by this evil spirit. Now David is serving Saul. He's very loyal to Saul, and he is in all accounts a great servant, a great trustworthy servant. Then if you remember, you might know a little story about David with the big guy. David slays Goliath, and he becomes a mighty warrior for Saul. So David leads the people to victory after victory after victory. And it brings more and more glory to Saul, and also continues to help grow Saul's kingdom. So David's now a mighty warrior. Every victory brings more praise and heap upon Saul, and his kingdom continues to grow. Now, you also have to remember that Saul is being tormented by an evil spirit. And as a ruler during this time, he knows that he will eventually be replaced. Now, Saul's son is Jonathan. And Jonathan and David become very close friends. And the friendship continues to grow and grow until they are best friends, and they actually love and trust each other. I don't know how many of you have a best friend that you know you love and you trust and with everything. So that's Jonathan and David. They are very close friends. They trust and they love each other. Now, after one of David's great victories, when he arrives back, the people start cheering, and they were saying that Saul killed his thousands, but David kills tens of thousands. Now, the evil spirit's working. Saul starts to get jealous that David's getting all this praise, and even more praise. They're giving David more credit than they are Saul. So, this is probably around the time that Saul realized that God has now left him, and that God was now preparing David to be the next king. It didn't help that Saul knew that his son and David were best friends. So that's kind of another little problem Saul has. And then when we think about people who are jealous or paranoid, they start thinking weird thoughts. And they think that everyone's out to get them. Now, we could talk about Saul again being tormented by this evil spirit. But if you know anyone who is paranoid or jealous, they think every conversation that's going on is about them. They think everything that's happening is to them. And they just can't, they can't think straight. You can't reason with them because they've gotten to themselves to the point of being unreasonable. And they start thinking these far-fetched ideas, and one thing that always got me about people who think everyone's talking about them or talking behind their back is, why do you think you're that important? Where you think no one has anything better to do than just talk about you. I'm thinking, how much of an ego or how much insecurity, because I guess it could be an either or, an insecurity or an ego thing, or as we see here with Saul, just being tormented by a spirit, an evil spirit that makes you think the worst possible things about everything. So again, it doesn't matter with Saul how far-fetched his ideas or theories, as long as they believe it, then they think everyone is conspiring against them and you can't talk any sense into them. So we see that clearly Saul, he starts seeing that every conversation between his son and David is a potential plot to overthrow him. He sees the people cheering for David as kind of a start of the revolt that's going to be that potential overthrow of him as king. So he sees no matter the people are celebrating and David had a great victory, his jealousy, his paranoia, all he can see is the people are revolting and they're going to choose David over me. Again, how much of that is the evil spirit? How much is that paranoia or jealousy or lack of security, whatever that may be? We see that in today's world just as we see it as much in this story. So, the truth, though, that Saul can't see, and usually, again, paranoid or jealous people can't see that, the truth is David is dedicated to Saul. And later, when he has chances to kill Saul, he chooses not to. because he knows Saul got in his place as king is because he was anointed by God. And David was not going to kill the Lord's anointed. And he had multiple times. If you remember, he cuts the cloak or the bottom of his robe. He goes over and takes his canteen and spear and yells back, "Hey, where's your guards at? Look, I was over there." It's like going over and taking an up-close selfie. Hey, I could have got you. Right? That's basically the biblical version of a selfie of, hey, this could have been really bad, but I chose not to do it. And then Saul would recognize, "Oh, David, I'm sorry." But then, again, the evil spirit would keep working, and then he'd be going after David again. So this passage is now another time in which David is hiding because he hears Saul has gathered soldiers, and he's going out again to try and kill him. So Jonathan goes out to see David, and this is where we see the encouragement that can happen between good friends. If you notice, the closer the relationship is, the more sincere the encouragement sounds. Right? Well, who encourages you the best? Someone that you know dearly and you trust everything they say, or some random person just walking by? The reason why I mention that is, as you guys know, I run a bunch of races and whatnot. And the last one I did a couple weeks ago, I was running with this woman. I think we ran together for about 10 miles. And her husband was cheering her on at different spots. And we're coming across one intersection, and he's there. He's like, "How you doing? You need anything? And, you need anything? I got gels. I got all these." She goes, No, I'm fine. And he goes, all right. Then I look at him and I said, "I'm doing great too. Thanks for asking." But there's a difference. She was being encouraged by someone she cares about and that's cheering her on. I had nobody there, so I just made a joke. But it was just a point. When you get encouragement, the closer that relationship, the more encouraging it is. When you run races, there's people cheering all along the sides, but it's the ones that know you by name. The ones that, can point you out of the crowd. If you ever notice most of those bigger races, marathons and stuff, they put your name on your bib number. It's your first name or whatever you choose to put. So people who are cheering, they read those out. So hey, come on, Mark, Omar. I know they don't know me from Adam, but you're hearing your name. That's supposed to be a little more encouraging. So that just shows you that the closer the relationship, the more powerful the encouragement. So Jonathan is giving out that encouragement to David. So if you're close to someone, you know each other's intimate details, then you know the type of encouragement they need. Right? So you see that here with Jonathan. We know that they're very close. They have made bonds with each other. In this passage, they talk about making a bond or a pact. And so much so that Jonathan said he would warn David if his dad was going to kill him. So what's Jonathan actually doing? He's kind of going behind the king's back. If I hear my dad's going to kill you, I will make sure I warn you. So Jonathan then tells David to not be afraid. That is the words of support and encouragement here in this passage. But what Jonathan says next really sells the point of why he should not be afraid. Jonathan says, "My father, Saul, will not lay a hand on you. You will be king over Israel, and I will be your second. Even my father, Saul, knows this." So Jonathan is encouraging David by reminding him of God's plan. And that Saul or nobody else is going to get in a way of David becoming king. Now there's a couple other reasons why this is even more impressive or significant when we talk about encouragement. Jonathan is the rightful heir. He's the son of the king. He would be the next one to be in line for the king. And even he's telling David that you're going to be the king. And I'll be second to you. So this is Jonathan really taking a pretty big step. He could easily have said, "Hey, I want to be king," but he knew God's plan. And he's going to make sure to encourage David so he remembers God's plan and give him all the support he needs. So under this situation, do you see how Jonathan's words are words of encouragement? I see it as encouragement because he's just taking his time and reminding his best friend the plan that God has laid out. Sometimes when we are in the middle of a fray or dealing with chaos, we miss out on the big picture. Right? We talk about that. Excuse me. We talk about that when we talk about our prayer life. Sometimes we're praying for just a small piece and we can't see the whole big picture, and we wonder why we don't get the answers that we want. So we see here that Jonathan is supporting David, trying to help him see the whole big picture and not getting caught up about this particular time in the desert when Saul's off trying to do something that won't be successful because God's not going to allow it to happen. So Jonathan says, my dad, Saul, is not going to lay a hand on you because you are going to be king. Do not be afraid. Encouragement. Do not be afraid. Not only are the words encouraging, but Jonathan's relationship with David and his sincerity make the words mean more to David than if they had come from someone else. After hearing me share in the opening about how I learned maybe I wasn't the most encouraging father. I'm not the most encouraging grandfather either, by the way. I have our grandson's here for the weekend, and which means my peace and quiet for the weekend is this is the quietest it's going to be all weekend for me. But we were over at a park yesterday, a tire swing. And he goes, hey, can I get on the tire swing? I was like, sure, go get on the tire swing. And he's trying to figure out how to sit on it and stuff. And one of the things that we have to work on with him is when things don't go right away, he gets frustrated. So I don't care how he sits in the tire swing. There's a right way and a wrong way to sit on a tire swing. And he got in, and I pushed him, and he couldn't keep it moving. And he was trying to move his feet, move around, and then he got frustrated, got off, and started kicking the tire swing. I said, ain't nothing wrong with the tire swing. I said, you just haven't figured out how to use it. So he got back on, and he started working around, and sure enough, he sat where he was on, and his legs were down in the hole. He was afraid he was going to fall through, and well, then I pushed him, and next thing you know, he starts moving his legs through the tire swing, and he's keeping himself go. So I said to him, looks like you figured out how to use a tire swing. I said, did the kicking it help at all? He goes, no. I said, well, you're going to need to learn that sometimes you won't always figure out how to do something the very first time. But you just keep trying till you figure it out. And look, I didn't need to push you anymore. You got rolling. He figured out how to stop himself. And then the hardest thing was how to get out of the middle of the tire swing. I said, dude, you're small. Stoop down and walk out from under it. Sure enough. But so was that encouraging? Or, well, I knew what we were trying to work on him, of not getting upset when things don't go the right way. I think by the end, he was very happy. When we got back to the house, he said, can you tell Grandma about the tire swing? I said, yeah, he figured out how to use a tire swing. Didn't go into a whole lot of detail other than that, but he figured it out. And sometimes, when we're talking about being an encourager, sometimes it's giving the encouraging word, or sometimes it's pressing them to keep trying so they continue to learn. We should all be encouraging each other and our brothers and sisters in Christ. But for us to be encouraging, it requires us to say the right words, but also requiring having a relationship where the words ring sincere. We can truly encourage others to be great when we start building those strong relationships with other people. So who can you encourage today? Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, I ask that you just lay on everyone's heart who the people are that they've built those relationships with, in which they can encourage them with whatever they may be struggling with. Sometimes they just need to keep trying. Sometimes they may need to be shown how to do something. And maybe sometimes they just need to know that you care and you support and you love them. Whatever it may be, Lord. Give us the right words and right actions that we may glorify you. In your precious name. Amen.